film will show you how to do a line check. Start your engine, taxi, and shut off your engine. Although the plane captain will have checked your plane before a flight, it is up to you to make a thorough and complete inspection before each hop. We will demonstrate this inspection with an SNJ, but it is the same with any plane you may fly. Approaching the aircraft, stay completely clear of the propeller. Place your parachute on the horizontal stabilizer, preparatory to beginning your check. By using a definite procedure for your line inspection, you will be less apt to forget anything. Establish this pattern of checkpoints in your mind. The cockpit, the trailing edge of the port wing, the port side wing tip, the port side leading edge, landing gear and port side engine section, the front engine section and prop, the starboard engine section, the starboard wing leading edge, the starboard wing tip, the trailing edge, starboard fuselage, the empennage and tail section, the port side fuselage and baggage compartment. The first checkpoint is the cockpit. Both front and rear cockpits should be examined for any loose articles or rags that might foul controls. Check the magneto and battery switch using slight pressure to be sure they are in the full off position. Unlock the controls by releasing the lever at the lower left side of the stick. Visually check the oil level, being sure to replace the cap. Check the port side fuel level and again replace the cap firmly. Inspect both top and bottom of the trailing edge of the port wing, looking for tears or breaks, wrinkles or bulges, snapped rivets, looseness or dents in the skin and in the aileron fabric, all of which might indicate structural failure. Check the movement of the ailerons and the condition of the fittings. Make sure that lock nuts are secure and that the pins are made fast by safety cotter pins or wire. When you reach the wingtip, move the end of it up and down firmly, but gently, to detect any excessive movement. Examine the leading edge of the port wing with equal care. When you approach the engine section, keep well clear of the propeller. Look at the landing gear. Notice the amount of oleo showing and check the struts. Be sure bolts are tight and tires properly inflated. Check the hydraulic lines for brakes or leakage. Examine the cowling and exhaust stack for looseness and loose fasteners. Taking care to keep clear of the propeller, walk around in front of the plane. Look at it to see that it is sitting level. Examine, but do not move, the propeller for cracks, nicks, or pitting. Look for any loose fittings or other irregularities about the engine. Make sure there is no oil or fuel leakage. Still keeping clear of the propeller, start your inspection of the starboard side. Be sure the chocks are properly placed under the wheels. Check the cowling. And the leading edge, just as you did the port side. Examine the pitot tube. Then check the starboard wingtip and test it for excessive play. Check the trailing edge of the starboard wing, top and underneath surfaces, just as you did the port wing. Check the fuel level. Then firmly secure the cap of the starboard fuel tank. Examine the starboard side of the fuselage. At the empennage or tail group, examine the rudder and elevators for freedom of movement and condition of the surface. Move the rudder so you can see the rudder horn and cables on both sides. Inspect the stabilizer and trim tab fittings for freedom and lubrication. Check top and bottom surfaces of the elevators. Then examine the tail wheel assembly for proper inflation and oleo fluid. Continue your inspection of the port side of the fuselage. Make sure all gear in the baggage compartment is firmly secured. And finally, that the door is tightly locked. After putting on your parachute, you are ready to get in the plane. Make sure you are comfortably seated in your cockpit. See that your plane captain is standing by with a fire extinguisher. Then, after giving and receiving the stand clear signal, open your throttle about a ½ inch, which will give you 600 to 800 RPM. Push your mixture control forward to full rich position. Set your propeller pitch control at full decrease RPM and place the gas selector valve on reserve. Prime your engine. 2 to 4 strokes when it is warm and 4 to 6 when it is cold, as it is now. Count the strokes from the time you feel definite pressure on the inward thrust. After checking the area behind your plane to be sure nothing will be damaged by your prop wash, and seeing that the area around your propeller is clear, again check the stand clear signal with your plane captain. Then, turn your battery switch to on. Make a final visual check of the area around your prop as you hold both brakes. Then, turn on the magneto switch. Lift the guard on the starter switch and hold the starter engaged until the engine is firing smoothly. Release the switch and replace the guard. Adjust your throttle slowly to obtain 600 to 800 RPM. Do not advance the throttle rapidly, which might flood the induction system and create a fire hazard. With your engine running smoothly at 600 to 800 RPM, check your oil pressure gauge. If it does not rise to 40 pounds in 30 seconds, stop the engine and report this to your plane captain. With your oil pressure at 50 pounds per square inch, you can safely advance your propeller pitch control to full increase RPM with no danger of starving your engine of oil. Then, adjust your throttle until the RPM holds steady at 1,000 RPM for the warm-up period. When the warm-up is completed and you have gone through your checklist and tested your engine, you are ready to taxi to the line. Be sure your seat is adjusted to give full throw of the controls and the best visibility. Test your controls to see that they move freely. Keep your left hand on the throttle, your right hand on the stick, and your feet off the deck on the rudder pedals so you can operate the brakes with your toes. Signal your plane captain to remove the chocks from the wheels. Keep your stick back so that your tail is held down. With the chocks removed, follow the signals of your plane captain as you taxi out of the line, but keep checking the area ahead yourself, since you are primarily responsible for the aircraft. Taxiing speed is controlled by your throttle and should never exceed a speed at which a man can trot. Proper taxiing is done by making continuous small S turns to assure that the path ahead of the plane is clear. Direction is controlled by rudder, augmented by brakes if necessary. Use your brakes sparingly and never apply both brakes simultaneously. Taxi at slow speed, holding the tail down and controlling your direction with positive rudder. Never taxi with excess power while holding the speed down with the brakes, as that might cause the plane to nose up. Lag in rudder effectiveness must be anticipated by applying opposite rudder while your nose is turning in one direction to bring it back to the opposite heading. When you have completed a flight, follow your plane captain's signals to return to your place in the line. After you have stopped, hold your brakes and advance your throttle to 1200 RPM. On the plane captain's signals, put your prop in full high pitch. Decrease RPM. When he signals by drawing his fingers across his throat, put the mixture control in the idle cutoff position and wait for the engine to stop. When the propeller has stopped, turn your battery switch to off and your magneto switch to off. Then turn off your gas selector valve. Finally, before leaving the cockpit, double check to see that the magneto switch and battery switch are off and your controls are locked. With the wheels properly chocked, you are ready to leave the plane. Fundamentally, all takeoffs, approaches, and landings, whether to and from a carrier or a training field, are executed in the same manner. The purpose of this film is to teach those fundamentals. Your plane is in the takeoff position. You have advised your instructor by interphone, tail wheel locked, ready for takeoff. Look around and make sure there are no other aircraft that may be landing or taking off. Then, after a final visual check with the tower, you are ready to go. You release the brakes and put your heels firmly on the deck. You then advance the throttle smoothly but positively to the sea level stop. Meanwhile, holding the stick slightly back of the neutral position, which keeps the tail down and allows the locked tail wheel to assist in maintaining directional control. Pick an object on the horizon for a reference, and remember that engine torque will tend to pull the nose to the left as takeoff power is applied. Be quick to correct this and any other swerves. As your speed increases, maintain directional control with your rudders and ease the stick forward. This is the takeoff attitude and is held throughout the takeoff run. As you approach takeoff speed, maintain this takeoff attitude, exerting back pressure on the stick as necessary. And your plane will leave the ground. As soon as you are safely airborne and all obstacles are cleared, retard your manifold pressure to 30 inches and your propeller pitch to 1950 RPM. As your speed approaches normal climb, 95 knots, assume a normal climbing attitude, adjusting your trim tabs as necessary, and climb straight ahead. At an altitude of approximately 100 feet, or when you have cleared the end of the runway, whichever comes first, depress the power push and bring up your wheels. When flaps are used on takeoffs, raise them at 200 feet above the terrain. At 250 feet, start your turn out of the field. When you have 1,000 feet of altitude, switch your gas selector valve from reserve to right tank, always remembering to turn through the left tank position and never through the off position. Here are the varying attitudes of your plane during a correct takeoff. Here is another takeoff run. Notice how the tail stays down and allows the locked tail wheel to help maintain directional control. As the speed increases, the nose lowers to a position between level flight and climbing attitude. Approaching takeoff speed, the angle of attack is increased and the plane leaves the ground. At approximately 100 feet, or beyond the end of the runway, the wheels are raised. Traffic permitting, at 250 feet altitude, the plane begins a climbing turn and the takeoff is complete. Before going into the approach, let's review briefly the standard field entry procedure. You join the 1,000-foot traffic pattern at an angle of less than 45 degrees and a speed of 120 knots. At position 1, you switch the gas valve to your best tank and apply at least 4 strokes to your wobble pump. At position 2, retard your throttle until the warning horn sounds, then depress power push and lower wheels. With your wheels locked, apply throttle to regulate your rate of descent. At approximately 800 feet and 95 knots, lower 20 degrees of flaps for a half-flap approach. Report landing checkoff list complete. Level off at 500 feet and 90 knots, and with no traffic interfering, cross over at 500 feet and 90 knots. At this point, a beam of the upwind end of the field, you begin your approach. You are at 500 feet, 90 knots, and wingtip distance from the field, with 20 degrees of flaps. Check your wheels down and locked, and report to your instructor by intercommunication system. Wheels down and locked. Immediately prior to reaching a position abeam of your intended landing point, retard your throttle to 15 inches and place your prop in full low pitch. At a point abeam of the intended point of landing, start a turn toward the landing line, trimming your plane for a power glide attitude, which will produce a speed of 80 knots. Gradually reducing power, plan your approach so as to intersect the landing line with approximately 150 feet of altitude, 75 knots airspeed, and 800 feet of straightaway, prior to reaching the desired landing spot in the first third of the runway. Make sure any obstacles at the end of the field are cleared by a safe margin. Then, reduce power further and finally close your throttle just prior to beginning your transition to a 3-point attitude for landing. Here is how the maneuver will look to you. You are in straight and level flight on the downwind leg. Abeam the upwind end of the field at 500 feet altitude, 90 knots, and 1850 RPM, you are at wingtip distance from the field. At this point, you advise your instructor, wheels down and locked. Maintain your wingtip distance from the runway throughout the downwind leg. Just before coming abeam of your intended point of landing, retard your throttle to 15 inches and put your prop in full low pitch. Abeam of the landing point, start your turn and trim the plane for a power glide attitude to produce a speed of 80 knots. Gradually reduce throttle so as to intersect your landing line at approximately 150 feet altitude, 75 knots, and 800 feet of straightaway from the point of intended landing. With any obstruction safely cleared, finally close your throttle just prior to starting the transition to landing. Watch this properly executed approach. Abeam your intended landing point, start a turn to intersect the landing line with 150 feet of altitude and 800 feet of straightaway. Here are the final stages of the approach, ending with the point at which the throttle is completely closed just prior to beginning the transition to a three-point attitude. This is the final position of your plane in its approach. The turn-in to the landing line is the most important phase of the approach. Done correctly, the plane is in good balanced flight, lined up with the center of the runway at the straightaway point. If the turn is too shallow or too late, you will overshoot your landing line and have to make a sharp right turn to line up with the center of the runway. Correspondingly, if your turn is too steep, you will be angling in toward the runway, and a steep left turn will be necessary to line up with the center of the runway. Remember also to take into account the strength of the wind. A strong wind requires a slower rate of throttle reduction and a slightly increased angle of bank to reach your 800-foot straightaway point with an altitude of 150 feet. When making your first approaches, throttle may be advanced to maintain safe flight if necessary. But with practice, you can correct the errors that necessitated such an increase in power. Beginning with this last attitude of the approach, which occurs with the plane at an altitude of about 30 feet, this altitude will vary with different planes and different wind conditions, you are ready to break your glide preparatory to landing. This is done by applying back pressure on the stick so that the nose raises slowly and smoothly and the plane comes to a three-point attitude a foot or two above the ground. Your aim is to maintain this attitude until the airplane lands, keeping it airborne as long as possible. This requires more and more backstick as the plane loses airspeed and settles to the runway. If you have done everything correctly, the stick will be all the way back as your plane contacts the runway in a three-point attitude. Keep it fully back until the plane stops rolling. Keep your heels on the deck until the plane touches down. Your landing is not complete until your plane has stopped. Use rudder and brakes to keep your plane rolling straight. Keep your stick all the way back to help maintain directional control by holding the tail and the lock tail wheel down. And always keep one hand on the throttle. Stay relaxed. Don't tense up. Here are some common errors. If you break your glide too low, you will hit the wheels first and bounce. If you pull your stick back too rapidly, when breaking your glide, your plane will balloon or gain altitude. If there is any doubt in your mind, don't try to land. Advance throttle and go around again. Here is a way to help you judge your altitude. Instead of looking at the ground or the nose of your plane, let your vision pick up 3 points that will act as a guide. For example, the horizon, this building, and the edge of the runway. You will instinctively be able to judge more accurately your distance above the ground through the position of these 3 points in relation to your line of vision. Keep this landing attitude in your mind. Let your eyes pick up objects and reference points on the ground below, ahead, and around you to establish the position of your plane as this position in relation to those objects. And your landing and landing runout will be as smooth as this one.
A crosswind is determined by the direction in which the wind is blowing across the landing line in relation to the final approach heading. This is a right crosswind, and this is a left crosswind, regardless of the position of your plane in the approach pattern. Let's examine the effects of a crosswind and how to correct for it. An aircraft flying directly into or with the wind travels a straight path over the ground. In a crosswind, the plane while moving forward is pushed away from this path in the direction of the wind. This off-course motion is called drift. To correct for drift, you must turn into the wind enough to counteract this sideways motion. This will make the plane fly at such an angle as to counteract the drift. This is known as crabbing. The amount of crab necessary will depend upon the strength of the crosswind. In crosswind approaches and landings, the standard field entry procedure is used, and the pattern is identical to that of a 180-degree power approach to a touch-and-go landing. If it is a right crosswind blowing you away from the landing line, the bank of your approach turn is fairly shallow, and your power reduction is more gradual. If it is a left crosswind blowing you toward the landing line, your power reduction is more rapid, and your approach turn more steeply banked to avoid being drifted past the landing line. Also remember that on the downwind leg, to avoid drift that forces you away from the landing line in a right crosswind and toward the landing line in a left crosswind, you must set up a crab by making a balanced turn into the wind and leveling your wings when you have achieved the desired track paralleling the landing line. When abeam the upwind end of the field, always check your landing gear and then report wheels down and locked. Seeing that a left crosswind is causing you to drift toward the field on the downwind leg, you make a balanced turn into the wind and set up a crab so that your track over the ground will parallel your landing line. Obviously, a crab to either port or starboard will affect your wingtip distance from the field, and you must now gauge your wingtip distance from the position where you estimate your left wingtip would be if you had not set up a crab. Also remember that once you have set up a crab, you are in balanced flight. As you make your approach turn, you reduce your power and adjust your bank according to the direction and velocity of the wind. In a strong left crosswind, such as this that is blowing you toward the landing line, your power reduction is faster. And your bank in the latter part of your approach turn will be fairly steep. If a strong right crosswind is encountered, your throttle reduction would be slower and your turn more shallow. Continuing in for your landing, you are in level flight in the straightaway. Notice the amount of drift, in this case from left to right, of your plane over the runway. To counteract this drift, lower your upwind wing, in this case your left wing, while holding enough opposite rudder to stop your nose from turning toward the low wing. Maintain this wing down correction and slowly bring your nose up for a full stall landing. As the landing occurs, your wings will automatically come to a level position. During your landing runout, keep the stick full back and into the wind, keeping your tail down and achieving maximum efficiency from the locked tail wheel. Be particularly alert to notice any tendency of the nose to swerve and immediately make the necessary corrections. Here is how a crosswind landing with correction for drift should look. Coming in for a landing in a strong left crosswind, the plane is in level flight in the straightaway. As it begins drifting across the runway, the upwind wing is lowered and opposite rudder held to keep its path straight. Making a full stall landing, its wings level off, and with the stick full back and into the wind, the plane begins its runout. With your landing runout under control, take off again, still holding the stick into the wind and using rudder pressure to avoid weathercocking and maintain a straight heading as you advance throttle. As your takeoff speed increases, you gradually ease off pressure on left rudder, still keeping the stick into the wind and maintaining a wing-level straight path down the runway. As the plane leaves the ground, it will begin to drift to the right. To compensate for this drift, set up a crab by making a gentle, balanced turn into the wind, thus maintaining a straight path over the ground. Don't use excessive rudder in the turn, which would dangerously reduce performance at this critical time. With the drift corrected, continue making a normal wing-level climb out of the field. To review, if it is a right crosswind blowing you away from the landing line, the bank of your approach turn is fairly shallow and your power reduction is more gradual. If it is a left crosswind blowing you toward the landing line, your power reduction is more rapid and your approach turn more steeply banked to avoid being drifted past the landing line. To follow a straight path over the ground in a crosswind condition, set up a crab by making a balanced turn into the wind, then leveling your wings when you have achieved your desired track. In landing, to counteract your drift across the runway, lower your upwind wing while holding enough opposite rudder to stop your nose from turning toward the low wing. Keep your stick full back and into the wind during your landing rollout. When you are airborne after takeoff, compensate for your drift by making a gentle, balanced turn into the wind, thus setting up a crab which is maintained as you continue your climb out of the field. impress on your mind the procedures you should follow instinctively in the event of an emergency at either high or low altitude. The high altitude emergency begins when your instructor closes your throttle. The first and most important thing to do is to establish a normal gliding attitude, which gives you an airspeed of 95 knots. Maintain this attitude. Don't try to dive off excess altitude to get into a nearby field. Holding your established glide, switch your gas selector valve to the other tank and operate your wobble pump. Check the area ahead and around you for a field within gliding distance. The plane you are now in can glide approximately 1 mile for every 1,000-foot loss of altitude when in proper gliding attitude. With a field selected, such as this on your left, determine the wind direction by smoke movement or water streaks, and plan your approach to be upwind of the field when you are at 3,000 feet. Place your prop in low pitch. Adjust your trim tabs for normal glide attitude, and open your canopy. Make a thorough and systematic check of your instruments in an effort to determine the cause of the emergency. But remember, the first consideration is to make a proper approach and safe landing, which requires that your attention be primarily concentrated outside the cockpit. Watch your altimeter, and during this simulated emergency, which started at 6,000 feet, clear your engine by a momentary application of throttle once in every 1,000 feet of descent to assure yourself that power will be available when needed. Try to plan your approach so that when you are at a 45-degree angle from your landing point, the number 1 position, you will be between 1,200 and 1,500 feet and ready to begin your landing approach. Look at it this way. Your throttle was closed and the emergency began at 6,000 feet. You selected a field and at 5,000 feet were a beam of its downwind end, directly above the landing line. Flying a circle about the field, you were at 4,000 feet, a beam of the middle of the upwind leg. At 3,000 feet, upwind of the runway. At 2,000 feet, a beam of the center of the field on the downwind leg. And at approximately 1,200 to 1,500 feet at the number 1 position, 45 degrees from your intended landing point. If you are not exactly at the proper altitude at your checkpoints, you may alter your pattern. Suppose you're at 5,500 feet here at the 5,000-foot checkpoint. Simply widen your circle by shallowing your bank, and at 4,000 feet you'll be where you belong. Or if you are at 3,500 feet here at the 4,000-foot checkpoint, steepen your bank and shorten your arc, and you'll be in the right position at the 3,000-foot point. The 3,000-foot and the 2,000-foot checkpoints are the most important. Try to hit the 2,000-foot point on the nose. From the number 1 position in a normal glide at 95 knots, the angle of bank and steepness of your turn to intersect the landing line will vary with the wind condition. In a strong wind, your turn must be steeper. In no wind, you may have to cross the landing line and make an S turn to return to it to give yourself 150 feet of altitude with 800 feet of straightaway. Unless the field is unsuitable, when you are sure you can reach the desired landing spot, lower your wheels, apply full flaps, and adjust your gliding speed to 80 knots, which you will maintain until you break your glide for the landing. Here is how it should look to you. At 4,000 feet, you are a beam of the center of the field headed upwind. At 3,000 feet, a beam of the upwind end. At 2,000 feet, a beam of the middle of the field headed downwind. And at position number 1, you're at 1,500 to 1,200 feet. The completion of your landing approach, if properly executed, should appear like this. You judge the strength of the wind, which in this case is moderate, and intersect your landing line at a point which will give you 150 feet of altitude with 800 feet of straightaway, from which point a successful landing can be made. In a low altitude emergency, simulated or actual, you must act instantly. The emergency usually begins after a takeoff. Never try to get back to your field. Remember, never try to get back to the field from which you just took off. You must learn to instinctively put the nose down and establish a gliding attitude. Then look for the best possible place to land. Say your engine cut out here as you are starting a climbing turn. Immediately establish a glide. Raise your wheels and look for a place to land. To you, it might appear like this. You've just become airborne after a touch-and-go landing. You started your turn and are in a climbing attitude when your engine cuts out. You immediately put your stick forward with a positive movement and establish a normal gliding attitude. You depress the power push and raise your landing gear. Then set your propeller in full low pitch. Then you select a spot for landing that you can reach. Don't try to stretch your glide or make a steep turn, and you go in for your landing using flaps when necessary. If you can find no suitable spot, make a full stall landing into the wind. Never try to stretch your glide as this man did. Never try to turn back to the field from which you took off, as this man did. Always land straight ahead or at a very slight angle. And if no landing spot is available, make a full stall landing into the wind. And your landing will probably be one such as this, from which you can walk away. The procedure for getting into a small field is actually a continuation of your high-altitude emergency that will bring you into a safe landing. However, in the high-altitude emergency, you glided down through checkpoints every 1,000 feet in planning your approach until you reached the number 1 position. Actually, at an altitude of 1,000 feet, you can get into the field either from this position or from position number 2, which is on the landing line directly downwind from the field. Also, in practicing the entry to small fields, you start with power on and enter the circular traffic pattern at an altitude of 1,000 feet with an airspeed of 120 knots and 1,850 RPM with your gas on the best tank for landing. Entry is made at an angle of 45 degrees or less, and the point of intended landing is kept at wingtip distance. The pattern may be entered at any point, but you must pass through the number 1 position before taking your first small field shot. If entry is made beyond the number 1 position, you must circle the field before making a shot at it with closed throttle. If the throttle is closed at the number 1 position, immediately place the prop in full low pitch. Depress the power push and drop your wheels. Trim your plane to a 95-knot glide in balanced flight. When the warning horn stops, check your landing gear down and report an ICS, wheels down and locked. In the straightaway, when you are in a position to reach the desired landing spot in the first third of the field, Apply full flaps and adjust your gliding speed to 80 knots. Maintain this attitude until you break your glide for landing. Always take into consideration the effect of the wind force on your flight path during the approach. Under strong wind conditions, which tend to delay your approach, you must make a steeper turn and a minimum amount of crosswind gliding. Conversely, in a light or no wind condition, your altitude must be dissipated by a shallower turn and a maximum of crosswind gliding. You may even have to cross the landing line and return to it in the case of the number 1 shot. If your throttle is closed at the number 2 position, you go through the same procedure. Prop in low pitch, depress power push, landing gear down, trim for a 95-knot glide, and report wheels down and locked when horn stops blowing. Judging your wind, make an S turn back to but not across your landing line. In the straightaway, full flaps are lowered and an 80-knot glide established and maintained until breaking the glide for landing. From the number 2 position also, you must take into account the effect of the prevailing wind condition. In a strong wind, your initial turn is steeper, with a minimum of crosswind gliding. In light or no wind, your initial turn is shallower, with a maximum crosswind glide. Plan your approach from either position so that flaps will be lowered in the straightaway, rather than in your approach turn. The length of your straightaway will vary depending on the type of your approach. However, flaps should be down and an 80-knot glide established with a minimum of 800 feet straightaway and 150 feet altitude from the point of intended landing. Here is a properly executed approach from the number 1 position under normal wind conditions. A 95-knot glide is established. Wheels lowered and locked. The turn into the landing line is made. Full flaps are lowered and the glide adjusted to 80 knots in the straightaway, and the plane goes in for a landing.
Remember that in strong wind conditions, your turn would be steeper with a minimum of crosswind gliding. In a no-wind condition, your turn is shallower with a maximum of crosswind gliding. Let's look at it from your viewpoint. You're circling the field at wingtip distance, 1,000 feet altitude at 120 knots. You are approaching the number 1 position. Your instructor closes the throttle. Instinctively, you follow this procedure. You check your instrument panel. Place your prop in low pitch, full increase RPM. Depress the power push. Place the landing gear lever in the down position and trim your plane to maintain a glide of 95 knots in balanced flight. When your warning horn stops blowing, you check your landing gear down and report on your ICS, wheels down and locked. Having established that it's a normal wind, you make a turn in toward the landing line. When it is apparent that you are in position to land in the first third of the field, lower full flaps and adjust your gliding speed to 80 knots. Maintain this attitude, making sure that you clear any obstructions to the entrance to the field by a safe margin. And come in for a full stall landing. Now you are approaching the number 2 position at wingtip distance and with a no-wind condition. Abeam the end of the field, your throttle is closed. Put the prop in low pitch. Depress power push. Lower your wheel. And trim your plane to maintain a glide of 95 knots in balanced flight.
With a strong wind condition, you would start a shallow turn back to the landing line here. In a normal wind, you would start it here. But in the no wind condition availing today, you wait until you are here, dissipating your altitude on your crosswind glide in a steeply banked turn back to the landing line, and in your return crosswind glide. After joining the landing line, you lower your flaps and adjust your glide to 80 knots. Then go in for your landing. Following your landing, and when the landing run is under control, apply full throttle and take off again. When you are safely airborne and clear of all obstructions, throttle back to 30 inches manifold pressure and adjust the prop to 1950 RPM. At 100 feet, raise your wheels, and at 200, if there are no high obstructions, raise your flaps. To maintain altitude as you raise your flaps, hold the nose attitude you had for 75 knots with full flaps. As your speed increases to 95 knots, trim the plane for normal climbing attitude, and traffic permitting, begin a climbing turn at 250 feet. Continue your climbing turn to join the circular traffic pattern at 1,000 feet and at wingtip distance. Ease your nose down to cruising attitude. At 120 knots, throttle back to 23 to 25 inches manifold pressure and adjust your prop to 1850 RPM. Here is how this maneuver to rejoin the 1,000-foot traffic circle looks. Starting your turn out of the field at 250 feet, you make a gradual climbing turn to the left, so as to join the 1,000-foot traffic circle at a wingtip distance to your landing line, making sure you are clear of any traffic already in the circle. You then continue on toward position number 1. Or if you wish to leave the circle, break away to the right, again at an angle of less than 45 degrees. Wingover is a relatively slow, rhythmic maneuver that begins with a climbing turn of 90 degrees. And ends with a smooth diving turn of 90 degrees, recovering at approximately the same attitude and airspeed with which the maneuver was started, and achieving a 180-degree reversal in the direction of flight. In training, it is always done in a series of 2. Get this pattern in your mind as a blueprint of what to do when you fly your first wingover series. You've lined up a road or section line to keep your bearings clear in the 180-degree change of direction. Set your trim tabs for straight and level flight, acrobatic cruise at 130 knots and 1950 RPM. Select a landmark for a reference point. When your right wing is abeam of this reference point, begin a smooth climbing turn. You combine your climb and bank smoothly and continuously until the nose of the airplane reaches the highest point of the climb,
at approximately 45 degrees from the original heading. From this point, the nose movement continues downward in a circular path towards the horizon, and the degree of bank is increased to its steepest angle when the airplane has turned to a point abeam of the original heading, or this 90-degree point. This steepest angle of bank may vary, but must always be steeper than 60 degrees, but not beyond 90 degrees. As the nose passes down through the horizon at approximately this 90-degree point, and the plane has an airspeed of about 70 knots, you will start rolling out of the diving turn at the 135-degree point and recover in level flight on the 180-degree heading. Another wing over is then done in the opposite direction. Remember, you maintain constant power setting from start to finish. With that predetermined pattern you are to fly, held in your mind, keep your eyes out of the cockpit. Here's how the maneuver will look to you. Select a road or section line to help keep your bearings during the 180-degree change of direction. Adjust your trim tabs for straight and level flight. Pick out some landmark for a reference point. And when it is a beam of your wingtip, in this case the right one, apply coordinated control pressures smoothly to avoid slipping and skidding, and start your climbing turn to the right. Watch the position of your reference point in relation to your plane. Your first checkpoint is the highest nose attitude. Your heading is 45 degrees from the original heading. Your reference point is at a 45-degree angle from you. A line drawn from it would bisect the angle formed by your right wing and the nose of your plane. Continuing your turn, the nose of the plane circles down toward the horizon, meeting it at your reference point when you reach a 90-degree heading. When you are abeam of the original heading at this 90-degree point, the angle of bank is at its greatest, being more than 60, but less than 90 degrees. A quick glance shows your airspeed to be approximately 70 knots. As you start rolling out of the diving turn, your next checkpoint is when your bearing is 135 degrees from your original heading. Now a line running from your reference point on the horizon bisects the angle formed by your left wing and the nose of your plane. Completing the right wing over, you are on the 180-degree heading. You then complete the series with a left wing over, which is done exactly the same way, but with opposite control pressures. Remember that turns to the right require more rudder than turns to the left to offset the effect of torque and slipstream. Also remember that wing overs are always done in a series of 2, and that before a series is started, you must make certain that the area is clear. Select a road or section line to help keep your bearings in the 180-degree change of direction. Make sure you are in straight and level flight with your reference point on your right wingtip. Then begin your wing over with a smooth climbing turn. The chandelle is a maneuver that combines a gain of altitude with a 180-degree change of direction in a maximum performance climbing turn and a precision rollout. The chandelle helps you develop coordination, orientation, and a sense of feel, since you are flying your plane through continually varying attitudes and airspeeds. As in wing overs, to help keep your bearings in the 180-degree direction change, line up on a road or section line below. At 130 knots and 1950 RPM, set your trim tabs for straight and level flight.
Then begin a smooth climbing turn. At about 90 degrees of turn from the original heading, your bank will be at its steepest angle, or approximately 60 degrees.
Your recovery is started just after this 90-degree position is passed. The roll in and out is done at the same rate. You finish rolling out of the turn on a heading 180 degrees opposite to that of entry. Your wing should be level and your airspeed slightly above stall, about 70 knots. Hold this attitude for a brief moment while you check your reference lines. Then lower the nose smoothly to level flight attitude. The entire maneuver is done with a constant power setting. Here is how the right chandelle will look to you. You are in level flight, your nose just below the horizon. Both wings are level. Pick out a reference line to help keep your bearings. Trim your plane for level flight with an airspeed of 130 knots and 1950 RPM. Then, with a constant power setting, start a coordinated climbing turn to the right. At the 90-degree point, your right wingtip will be crossing your reference line, and your angle of bank will be at its steepest, or approximately 60 degrees. Your nose is continuing its constant rise. Start your recovery just as this 90-degree point is passed by continuing to increase the angle of attack and using coordinated left rudder and aileron to roll out. At the 180-degree heading, both wings should be level. And the nose is still in a climbing attitude. Hold this attitude for a moment while you check your reference line. Then lower the nose smoothly to a level flight attitude. Remember that torque effect varies constantly during the maneuver, and since this effect increases as airspeed decreases, it is at its maximum during the rollout, and corresponding aileron and rudder pressures must be used to correct it. Pulling out of the right chandelle requires less left rudder pressure, but more aileron. Conversely, rolling out of the left chandelle requires little aileron, but may require considerable right rudder pressure. How much? Only experience can answer that. Watch this correctly executed left chandelle carefully. Now watch the movements of the controls that accomplished it. And now from your viewpoint, watch them both together. You start with a coordinated climbing turn. At the 90-degree point, your angle of bank is at its steepest. Start rolling out. At the 180-degree heading, your wings are level. Your nose still climbing. Hold this attitude momentarily. Then lower the nose to level flight. Practicing chandelles, and wingovers will help you greatly in mastering more advanced maneuvers as your training progresses.
wing-over roll is an acrobatic maneuver that begins with a smooth climbing turn, followed by a rapid roll to the inverted position, and a slower, regulated roll until you recover in level flight on your original heading. Practicing this maneuver to the left and the right will help you develop coordination, orientation, and a sense of feel for your aircraft in various changes of airspeed and attitudes, including inverted flight. The purpose of this film is to help you visualize what the wing-over roll is and how it is done. Fundamentally, it is composed of 3 phases. The first half is done exactly like the first part of a wing-over, which you have already flown. The next phase is a roll that starts at a rapid rate. Finally, you regulate the roll so that you recover in level flight on your original heading, airspeed, and altitude. Let's examine the 3 parts of this maneuver. You fly a wing-over to here. At this point, you are approaching a 90-degree heading, and your nose is approximately 15 degrees above the horizon. Your angle of bank is greater than 60, but less than 90 degrees. You then start a roll at a rapid rate. At the 90-degree point, you are completely inverted, and your wings are level. At this point, you begin to regulate your roll, so that after a moderate dive, you recover in level flight on your original heading and at the same airspeed and altitude. Now let's watch the maneuver in slow motion. As you can see, the start of this maneuver is the smoothly coordinated climbing turn of the wing-over up to the roll point. You will notice that the roll from its beginning to the 90-degree point is more rapid than it is from the 90-degree point to the completion of the maneuver. Before beginning a wing-over roll, select intersecting roads or section lines for reference. Here is the ground track pattern you will make when flying a wing-over roll to the left. Go through your acrobatic checkoff list, then make a 180-degree or 2 90-degree clearing turns, rolling out parallel to one of your intersecting reference lines. Pick a point on the horizon to use as a checkpoint at the 90-degree position. Then begin a climbing turn as you would in a wing-over. At about 80 to 85 degrees from your original heading, your nose should be approximately 15 degrees above the horizon. Your angle of bank is greater than 60, but less than 90 degrees. A glance over your left side will show your reference line and verify your heading. At this point, you start a roll at a rapid rate, continuing to the 90-degree heading, at which point your nose is on the horizon exactly at the checkpoint. Your reference line is directly beneath you, and you are completely inverted with your wings level. Continue your roll, but at a more gradual rate, so that you recover on your original heading and at the same airspeed and altitude as at the beginning of the maneuver. Let's look at it from your point of view. Now let's go through the roll again, stressing the checkpoints. You have completed your acrobatic checkoff list and trimmed for level flight, 130 knots, 1950 RPM. Now select your reference line. Make a 90-degree clearing turn toward your reference line. Then make a second 90-degree clearing turn and roll out paralleling your reference line. Now pick out some object on the horizon, in this case to your left, since you are flying a left wing over roll, to be your checkpoint for the 90-degree position. Then begin a smooth climbing turn exactly like a wing over. After passing the high point and as the nose drops toward the horizon, look to the left. When you are approximately 80 to 85 degrees from your original heading, your nose should be about 15 degrees above the horizon. Your angle of bank should be more than 60 and less than 90 degrees, and the line leading to your reference point is visible. At this point, you begin a rapid roll by bringing your stick full over. Now look back over your nose. Notice that the nose will come down through your 90-degree checkpoint as you approach the inverted position. At the 90-degree heading, you are completely inverted in a wing level attitude. From this position, you regulate your roll, continuing it more slowly so that you will finish the maneuver on your original heading, airspeed, and altitude, lined up parallel to your first reference line. Let's review the maneuver. First, select a reference line. Think of the ground track pattern a left wing over roll makes. Go through your acrobatic checkoff list and make clearing turns, rolling out parallel to your reference line. Select a point on the horizon as a checkpoint for your 90-degree position. Make a climbing turn to a point 80 to 85 degrees from your original heading. Roll rapidly to a 90-degree heading, where you are in level inverted flight. Then, at a more gradual rate of roll, recover so that you are in level flight on your original heading, airspeed, and altitude. Let's watch another wing over roll in slow motion. Remember that it's the same as a wing over to here. Then a rapid roll to here. And a more gradual roll in a moderate dive to the completion of the maneuver. When you have learned to coordinate your controls throughout the entire maneuver, your wing over rolls will be as smoothly executed as this one. barrel roll is a coordinated roll about an imaginary point located at a 45-degree bearing from the original heading. It combines a climbing turn of 90 degrees with a diving turn of 90 degrees. The nose of the plane describes a circle about the imaginary point, half above the horizon and half below it. Practicing the maneuver to right and left will help you develop coordination, orientation, and feel for the aircraft in its various changes of attitudes and airspeed. This film is intended to help you visualize the pattern of the barrel roll and how the maneuver is accomplished. It is done with a constant power setting and with the aircraft checked for acrobatic cruise. It begins with a steep climb, followed by a roll done at a constant rate, so that the loss of airspeed in the climbing half of the maneuver is regained during the diving half, and you recover on your original heading, altitude, and airspeed. Before beginning a barrel roll, pick out reference lines to help keep your heading clear. Go through your acrobatic checkoff list. Make a 180-degree turn or two 90-degree clearing turns, paralleling the chosen reference line as you roll out of the last turn. Select some point on the horizon at a 45-degree bearing from you. Start a steep climb, then apply aileron and rudder in the direction you wish to roll. Apply your control pressures properly to fly your plane through the maneuver, recovering in level flight at the same altitude, airspeed, and heading. Here are some checkpoints. At approximately 45 degrees from your original heading, you are in a 90-degree bank. Your wings vertical to the ground. Your nose is at the top of the circle. Continuing to the 90-degree heading, you are in level inverted flight with your nose just on the horizon. Your reference line is directly below you, and your horizon checkpoint is still at a 45-degree bearing from you in this inverted position. Rolling at a constant rate, you complete the maneuver on your original heading, altitude, and airspeed. If executed properly, the nose of your aircraft has described a circle around your checkpoint, remaining at a constant distance from it throughout. Your reference line is in the same position as at the beginning of the maneuver. Let's look at it from your point of view. Now let's go through the roll again, stressing the checkpoints. You have completed your acrobatic checkoff list and trimmed for level flight 130 knots, 1950 RPM. Now select your reference lines. Two roads intersecting at a 90-degree angle are best. Make a 90-degree clearing turn toward your reference line. Then make a second 90-degree turn and roll out, paralleling your reference line. Select a checkpoint on the horizon at a 45-degree bearing from you. Remember that your nose is to describe a circle about this point. Begin a steep climb, then a smooth, coordinated roll that continues throughout the maneuver. Watch that again. Remember to keep your rate of roll constant. Now let's look at your checkpoints. At approximately 45 degrees from your original heading, you are at 90 degrees of bank. Your horizon checkpoint is here. Continuing your roll, you reach the 90-degree heading with your nose meeting the horizon and your aircraft in inverted flight. Your checkpoint is again visible at a 45-degree bearing from you. And by looking over the nose, you will see your 90-degree reference line directly below you. Continuing your constant roll, you complete the maneuver in level flight on your original heading, altitude, and airspeed. Your checkpoint is at a 45-degree heading from you, and you are again paralleling your reference line. Remember, with your reference line selected and your clearing turns completed, pick a checkpoint on the horizon that is at a 45-degree bearing from your plane. Plan the maneuver so that the nose of your aircraft will describe a circle around this checkpoint. Keep your rate of roll constant, making whatever slight corrections may be necessary with your controls. Memorize these checkpoints. At the start, you are paralleling your reference line and have selected your checkpoint bearing 45 degrees from you. At the highest point of the circle, your wings are vertical. Your checkpoint is visible over your left side. When you are at the 90-degree heading, you are in level inverted flight with your nose meeting the horizon. Your checkpoint is again at a 45-degree bearing from you. By looking over your nose, you can see your reference line directly beneath you. Holding the roll constant, you complete the maneuver. Always keep the first half of the circle your nose is describing around your checkpoint the same distance above the horizon as the last half is below it. And your barrel rolls will be as smooth, steady, and well coordinated as this one. The most effective use of the airplane as a weapon of war, both defensively and offensively, is when it acts in teams as a single unit. Consequently, knowing how to fly formation is a must for all military pilots. The smallest unit in a formation of planes is the section which may consist of 2 or 3 planes. The section leader is primarily responsible for the conduct of the section and its safe navigation. The job of the wingman or wingman is to maintain proper wing position in relation to the leader. When flying a wing position, the leader's wings are your horizon. A fundamental rule of formation flying is to keep your wings parallel to your leaders at all times. You'll find you have a tendency at first when you're flying wing to fly with your inboard wing down. This causes your plane to move toward your leader. Attempting to correct this by adding outside rudder causes your plane to skid. Use aileron to keep your wings level with your leader's wings. All 3-plane formation flying is parade formation, which is close and dressed up. The wing position is flown with 75 feet between corresponding parts of the wing plane and the leader, and on a 45-degree bearing from him. To establish this bearing, Center your plane in the 90-degree angle formed by the trailing edge of the leader's wing and his fuselage. In this position, your inboard wingtip will be 10 feet laterally from your leader's wingtip, and your nose will be 10 feet aft of his tail. You will also maintain a 10-foot step down, which keeps you below the prop and wing wash of your leader. If you fly low enough so that you can just see the inboard wheel cover of the lead plane, you will be approximately 10 feet step down. In making turns, the inside wingman should drop down to maintain his 10-foot step down and roll on the leader's axis. The outside wingman rolls on his own axis. Since the inside wingman travels a shorter distance, he must retard throttle slightly to keep from overrunning the leader, while the outside wingman, traveling a greater distance, must advance throttle to keep up. You are the starboard wingman flying in parade formation in a V. To hold your position, frequent small adjustments of stick, rudder, and throttle must be made to correct any relative motion. If the leader seems to be pulling ahead, you are actually dropping back and must use throttle to stop the relative motion. If he seems to rise, you are dropping down and must use your stick to pull back up. Lateral movement, of course, is corrected with rudder. When the leader starts a right turn, you retard throttle slightly, dropping down and rolling on his axis to maintain your 10-foot step down. During the turn, the opposite wingman will look like this. On turning to the left, you advance throttle to maintain your 10-foot aft position and roll on your own axis, keeping your 10-foot step down throughout. The opposite wingman will be in this position. Now let's see how to form an echelon. This is the signal from the section leader to change from V to right echelon. This is the signal of execution. After the signal to form a right echelon has been given, and on the signal of execution, the left wingman drops down with slightly reduced power until he is 20 feet below the opposite wingman. He then moves back until he is 10 feet behind his tail. He then skids slowly across by applying right rudder and using his stick to keep his wings level. He adds throttle as necessary to maintain nose to tail distance. He stops his skid and eases up into position. The wings must be kept level and the movement slow. On receiving the return to V signal, the number 3 plane drops down 10 feet, since he has already stepped down 10 feet from the plane ahead, crosses back smoothly, using throttle as necessary to keep from dropping back. On reaching the opposite side, he again uses throttle to move forward to a 45-degree bearing from the leader, then pulls up to a 10-foot step down. After receiving the right echelon and execute signals, the left wingman drops down, then back until he is 20 feet below and 10 feet aft the opposite wingman. He crosses under slowly, maintaining his position by use of throttle. Then pulls up 10 feet into the right echelon position. After the return to V signal, the number 3 man drops down 10 feet, crosses back, then moves forward to a 45-degree bearing from the leader. He then pulls up to a 10-foot step down. Left echelons and returns to V are performed in exactly the same way to the other side. Here is how the maneuver will look to you. You receive the right echelon and execute signal. The opposite wingman is kept in view as you drop down until you are 20 feet below, and then back to 10 feet behind him. Keep your wings level and cross under smoothly. To form a right echelon, advance your throttle and ease up into position. On the signal to return to V, you drop down 10 feet. Advance throttle to maintain nose-to-tail distance while crossing back. Then add further throttle to move forward to a 45-degree bearing from the leader. Then pull up to a 10-foot step down. Before you can fly in formation, you have to know how to get into formation. This is accomplished by the original rendezvous. Before taking off, a landmark is selected where the planes will meet. Traveling at 115 knots and at a predetermined altitude, you will rendezvous in this manner when you arrive at the rendezvous point. When the leader is directly over the point of rendezvous, he begins a left 30-degree angle of bank turn. At the completion of 180 degrees of turn, the distance from the point becomes the radius of the rendezvous circle and can be maintained with about 15 degrees of bank. It is necessary, however, for the leader to vary his degree of bank slightly in order to maintain a circular pattern around a geographical point, under all except no-wind conditions. The first plane to arrive directly over the point is the leader. He begins his 30-degree angle of bank turn. The second plane rendezvous by entering the rendezvous circle and heading directly for the center of it. After determining the leader's position from him, and when directly over the center of the point, he commences a rapid left turn and continues it until he has the leader on a 45-degree bearing to the starboard of his heading and is within the sector made up by a 225-degree and a 255-degree relative bearing from the leader. The closing relative motion commences at this point and should be continued until he is in position to join up. Pausing momentarily on the inside of the leader, he crosses under to right echelon. The third plane follows the same procedure. Here is the CV rendezvous used by the Navy as the quickest means for planes to join up after leaving a carrier. To simulate planes taking off, a right echelon will be broken and a column formed in this manner. After giving the breakup signal, the lead plane breaks to the left in a 45-degree bank, 180-degree turn, holding his altitude constant. After 5 seconds, at which time the leader will be abeam of the second plane's left wing, the second plane gives the lead to the third plane and also goes into a 45-degree bank, 180-degree turn, being sure to maintain his altitude. 5 seconds later, when the second plane is abeam of the third plane's left wing, the third plane makes the same turn. The angle of bank may be varied during the last 30 degrees of turn in order to line up directly behind the leader. It is important that all planes maintain their altitude during the turn to ensure a proper interval in column. Once in column, all planes should use throttle to adjust their airspeed to 115 knots, and the wingmen should adjust their altitude to that of the leader by placing him on the horizon. The leader maintains his new heading for 10 to 12 seconds, then begins a 180-degree turn to the left with 15 degrees of bank. When the leader bears 30 degrees off the second plane's port bow, the second plane makes a steep left turn, which he holds until the leader bears 45 degrees from him on his starboard bow. At the same time, positioning himself within the 225 to 255 degree relative bearing sector from the leader. He holds these respective bearings as he closes on the leader. When the third plane has the leader 45 degrees from his port bow, he too makes a steeply banked turn and closes on the leader in the same manner. Remember to keep all aircraft ahead of you in sight at all times. As the second plane closes on the leader, he pauses momentarily on the inside, then crosses under, moving into right echelon. The third plane does the same, waiting if necessary on the inside until he is assured that the second plane is moving into his position. You are third plane in a right echelon. The leader gives the CV breakup and rendezvous signal, passes the lead to his wingman, blows a kiss, and starts his 45-degree bank, 180-degree turn. After 5 seconds, when the lead plane is abeam of the second plane's left wing, he passes the lead, blows a kiss, and begins his 45-degree bank, 180-degree left turn. 5 seconds later, you follow, making sure you maintain your altitude. Completing your turn, you will still be 10 feet step down. Throttle should be used at this point to adjust airspeed and altitude to the leaders. The leader holds this heading for 10 to 12 seconds. His turn. Then starts a 15-degree bank, 180-degree turn to his left. When the leader bears 30 degrees off the second plane's bow, the second plane commences a steep left turn. When the leader is 45 degrees off your port bow, you make a steep left turn, holding it until the leader is almost 45 degrees off your starboard bow, and you are in a 225 to 255 degree relative bearing sector from the leader. At this point, reduce your angle of bank sufficiently to commence a smooth, controlled rate of closure. Keep these bearings as you close on the leader. Don't wait until in position to cross under, to take your step down. It should be taken as soon as you are close enough to recognize it. Remember, keep all planes ahead of you in sight at all times. After closing the leader, the second plane hesitates momentarily, then crosses under and behind the leader into his position in the right echelon. You follow the same procedure, flying opposite your proper position for a brief moment on the inside of the turn, and then crossing under to the right echelon. With practice, this maneuver can be done with constant power setting. But if at any time you find yourself falling back, add full throttle to catch up. If through misjudgment the second plane has fallen back, you wait on the inside opposite your wing position until he catches up. Then cross under as he is assuming his position. Always keep your eyes on your leader for any signals he may give. Here he is signaling that he is giving the lead to the second plane. The pilot of the second plane acknowledges the signal by patting his head and pointing to himself. And the pilot of the lead plane moves out 10 feet, drops down 20 feet below the second plane. falls back to a position opposite you. Then moves in 10 feet and comes up 10 feet to make a V formation. The old leader must not take his eyes off the new leader at any time during the lead change. The parade four-plane division is composed of two-plane sections. The number 1 man is the division leader. The number 3 man, the section leader. Bearings, step downs, and distances from plane to plane are the same as in 3-plane work. To form an echelon to the right, the number 2 man describes an arc as he flies across. At the bottom of the arc, directly aft of the leader, he is stepped down 20 feet. To then form left echelon, the number 2 plane flies back across first. Section then follows, using throttle as necessary to maintain nose-to-tail distance. Turns in the balanced parade formation are made similar to the turns of 3 planes in a parade V formation. Turns in echelon are also the same. However, in the 4-plane parade formation, turns are never made into an echelon. The standard tactical formation for maximum maneuverability and effectiveness is the 4-plane division in free cruise. In this formation, the wingman and the section leader drop back to a 30-degree bearing on the division leader, while increasing their step-down and nose-to-tail distance to 20 feet respectively. This step-down must be maintained to avoid becoming caught in the slipstream or wing wash and to provide ample space for all planes to maneuver freely. A 4-plane division in free cruise balanced flight appears like this when seen from the rear. When a turn is made, all planes are free to maneuver within a 60-degree limit astern of the division leader, moving inboard or outboard while maintaining position. When any turn is completed, each wingman dresses on his section leader on the outboard side of the division, bearing 30 degrees. The number 2 man is always on the opposite side from the second section. If you are flying number 4 position in slow cruise, free cruise right echelon, a turn will look like this. Turns away from the echelon are done by all planes moving into position vertically below the leader. Upon completion of the turn, the planes move back into their original echelon positions. In turns into the echelon, the number 2 man eases into position vertically below the leader. And as the number 3 and number 4 men find themselves pulling in too close to the plane in front, they also move into position vertically below the leader. When the turn is completed, all planes return to their original echelon positions. To rotate wingmen, the division leader gives the signal and the second plane slides across to the left, making a balanced formation. The number 3 and number 4 planes move up one position. The number 2 plane then passes back down the echelon and crosses to the right and takes up his position as the number 4 plane. Now let's see how the lead is passed. From your position as number 4 man, here is how it will look to you. The division leader moves out 10 feet, drops down, and then back, passing the same distance from each succeeding plane as he did the previous one. He then crosses to the right and takes his position as the number 4 man.